Shalom, Bruchim Abayim, welcome to Sheva'im Panim LaTorah, to 70 Faces of the Torah, and also Sulam Yaakov. This week's Torah portion is Parashat Bo, which in Hebrew means to come. I have subtitled this teaching, Time is of the Essence. In this week's Torah portion, we read about the first mitzvah that HaShem gave to Israel as a nation. That mitzvah is the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, which we translate as the sanctification of the new moon, or the new month, but actually it means something a little bit more deeper than what most people understand, and we'll get to that. We read here in Shemot, Exodus chapter 12, verse 1 through 2. The Torah says, Vayomer Adonai el Moshe ve'Aharon be'eretz Mitzrayim lemor. Hashem said to Moshe and to Aharon in the land of Mitzrayim, saying over there, HaChodesh hazeh lachem rosh chodeshim rishon. This month, and the month that the Torah is alluding to, is Chodesh Nisan. That's considered the first month of the Hebrew calendar. It says it is the beginning of the months. Hu lachem lechadshe hashana. It is for you the first months of the year. Now, one of the things I'd like to briefly point out here before going on is to explain a small discrepancy that I normally see online, and some people email me. And that is the discrepancy of observing Rosh Hashanah, the first of Tishrei, as the head of the year, the Hebrew calendar, compared to, let's say, the first of Nisan, considering that the first of Nisan actually is a demarcation of when the Jewish calendar begins. Okay, it's the origins. So why is it that the Jewish people observe Rosh Hashanah as the head of the year, and when the year changes, instead of, let's say, the first of Nisan? Fair question. The reason why we still observe Rosh Hashanah, basically the first of Tishrei, instead of making Rosh Hashanah the first of Nisan, has to do with the origin of man's creation. According to Chazal, Adam HaRishon was believed to be created on the first of Tishrei. And therefore, the first of Tishrei, which we call Rosh Hashanah, also is called Yom Teruah, Yom HaZikaron, and of course Yom Hadim, has different, if you will, names to it as well, which we get into for Rosh Hashanah, but essentially represents the birthday of mankind. And so every human that's in existence today is a descendant of Adam HaRishon. And so originally, Rosh Hashanah was never a Jewish holiday. It became adopted as a Jewish holiday once Hashem entered into covenant with Avraham, bestowing the rectification of creation upon Avraham and his descendants. And so while the Jewish calendar begins in the first of Nisan, as in this week's Torah portion it mentions, the origins of man's creation still originates on the first of Tishrei in the Hebrew calendar, which is why always the first of Tishrei is when we change years, like 57, 81 to 82, 82 to 83, etc. And so a lot of Jewish history is pertinent to the calendar dating of the first of Nisan. So a lot of things that we read about in the Torah, a lot of things that we read about in the Tanakh, the history of the kings and the judges, and many of those things are pertinent to the observance of the month of Nisan. Okay, also sometimes it's called the month of Aviv, the spring season. Okay, the Torah sometimes refers to Nisan too, but there's not a contradiction between the two. And so while Israel has been entrusted with the mission of tikkun, or rectification of the sin of Adam, by incorporating Rosh Hashanah as a day of observance, nonetheless it's still to represent all of mankind on. And so it really is a birth date of creation. And so there's not really a major discrepancy between the two. The Jewish calendar, what we start in Nisan, Pesach, and everything, that's not pertinent to the rest of mankind. Okay, the nations are not commanded to observe Pesach or to observe Shavuot or any of the other Shabbat things of that nature, Rosh Chodesh. They're not required to observe those things unless they become Jewish. And so that is why there is a slight difference, if you will, in reconciling, I would just say, those discrepancies between observing Rosh Hashanah as the head of the year instead of, let's say, Rosh Hashanah on the first of Nisan. Okay, so that should answer and settle that question that's brought up a lot of times online. Now, according to the Torah, Israel's ability to come out of Mitzrayim appears to be dependent upon their observance of Kiddush HaChodesh. And this is very interesting, and a lot of times it's overlooked. Because before the mitzvah of Pesach or Brit Milah, Shabbat, Taharat Mishpacha, or any of the other mitzvot in the Torah, there was the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. And so, in a way, the Torah is teaching us that depending on how we observe Kiddush HaChodesh would determine how we observe the rest of the mitzvot. And I think that's saying a lot. And this also explains a big misnomer a lot of people have. When they hear about Kiddush HaChodesh, they say, oh, it deals with the sanctification of the month and the new moon. And that's not 100% true, okay? For one, the word Chodesh in Hebrew does not simply mean month. Rather, Chodesh comes from the word Chadash, which means renewal. Okay, so a better way to understanding the verse back here in Exodus 12:1, when it says, HaChodesh hazeh lachem rishon chodeshim rishon, it's not so much that this month is for you, the beginning of the months, but that this renewal, okay, this renewal, HaChodesh hazeh, this renewal shall be for you, the beginning of the months, because the deeper meaning in Kiddush HaChodesh is about renewal. This is why if you pay close attention to the prayers that we daven, when incorporating elements of Rosh Chodesh during what we call the Musaf, the additional prayers, we petition HaShem for forgiveness of sin, we ask for parnosa, we ask for devotion and love of Torah. It's all about renewal. And this is what Kiddush HaChodesh is. It's about renewing ourselves month after month after month. It's not just about showing up to the synagogue and inaugurating a new month. There's a physical aspect, but also a spiritual aspect to the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh as well. And that's very important because what is the underlying purpose of Kiddush HaChodesh? Why was it the first mitzvah that Hashem gave to the Jewish people? Now, if you don't know, the Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar, which means it is based upon the cycles of the moon. As the moon goes through its various cycles, the illuminated part of the moon is not always visible. And so our view of the moon's illuminated portion increases in the first half of the month and then decreases in the second half of the month. And so at the very end of this cycle, the illuminated part of the moon is invisible. And when the moon completes its cycle to begin a new cycle, this in Hebrew is called molad, and it literally means to give birth. In this case, birth of the moon. And so a complete lunar cycle, from the time of the molad of one month to the molad of the next month, is roughly 29 and a half days. Chazal, the sages, back when the Sanhedrin was formed, and how they actually used to observe Kiddush HaChodesh before they fixed the calendar, the sages actually calculated the length of a lunar cycle is about 29 days, 12 hours, and also what's called 793 halachim, or 44 minutes, and also 3 1/3 of a second. Each chelik, or hour you can call it, is divided into 1,080 halachim parts or units, which means that each chelik, if you will, hour, equals 3 1/3 seconds. So since the Jewish calendar consists only of whole days, a month will sometimes contain 30 days, and sometimes it will contain 29 days. And so this means that Rosh Chodesh sometimes will be on the 30th or the 31st day of the previous month. And so this means that whenever the previous month has 30 days, the following month will have 2 days of Rosh Chodesh. The first day of Rosh Chodesh will be the last day of the previous month, and the second day of Rosh Chodesh will be the first day of the new month. Okay, this is very important because I've seen a lot of people who've looked at the Hebrew calendar and are quite confused, like, why do we have 2 days of Rosh Chodesh? Why, which day is the right day to observe? And this is the reason how we observe Rosh Chodesh in this manner. So since the lunar calendar is 29 and a half days long, and basically a 12-month lunar year would basically equal 354 days, this means that the lunar year is about 11 days shorter compared to the solar year, which contains 365 days. And what's unique about this is that over the course of about 3 years, the lunar calendar ends up falling behind the solar calendar by 33 days, which basically constitutes a whole month. And so this means that the month of Nisan would be 33 days or a whole month earlier in the solar year than it had been 3 years before that. And so to compensate for this loss of time, and also to make sure that the holidays of the Hebrew calendar stay intact, The Sanhedrin decided to add an additional month of Adar during a leap year. And this is actually known as what's called an intercalated year. But you can call it a leap year as well, where you have 2 months of Adar at the end of the Hebrew calendar. And this intercalation in Hebrew is actually called Ibor Hashanah, which literally means intercalation of the year, but we can just also call it a leap year. So the mitzvah of Ibor Hashanah is not limited to the renewal of the month, but also to Lekadesh Chadashim, to setting apart or sanctifying the months to determine what's called the Moedei HaShem, the appointed times of HaShem, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, things of that nature. The Ibor Hashanah must be observed at fixed times, and this is very important, why we have to maintain the calendar so strictly. We go here to Shemot, Exodus chapter 13, verse 10, and the Torah tells us, V'shchamarta et hachucha, that you shall observe this decree, Hazot lemo'adah, at its designated, its appointed time, miyamim yamima, from year to year. So what the Torah is teaching us, okay, and this passage here is speaking about the decree, the Chocha Pesach, is that basically Pesach needs to make sure that it appears at its designated time, which is in the spring. It cannot appear in the winter. It cannot appear in the fall. In fact, if we go to Deuteronomy chapter 16:1, the Torah reiterates over there, I think this is Parashat Ra'eh, it says, Shomer et Chodesh ha'aviv asita Pesach, that you shall observe the month of ripening, which is the month of Aviv, when the early spring harvest, also called Chag HaKatzir sometimes in the Torah. At that time, you will perform Pesach, which we know takes place on the 15th of Nisan. And so we see clearly here, Hashem commanded us to observe Pesach at the time the grain crops are in their ripening stage. Likewise, in the fall season, when we observe Sukkot, Hashem commanded us to observe Sukkot at its fixed time, since Sukkot is related to the fall harvest season. And that's brought down in Exodus 34, verse 22, V'chach ta'aseh lecha ha'asif. And here Sukkot also is called Chag ha'asif, which literally means the festival of ingathering, which refers to the final season of the harvest before you enter into the winter, and you have 6 months of silence between Chodesh Tishrei and Chodesh Nisan. Lecha ha'asif tikufat hashana, at the changing of the year. Literally, tikufat hakafal is a circuit. Okay, the circuit of the year, because when we refer to the festivities in the Torah, we call them Chagim, right? Okay, Chag Pesach, Chag Sukkot. Chag, if you want in Hebrew, refers to the concept of something that's circular in nature. Hakafah is a circuit, something you go in a circuit to, right? So Sukkot represents the last circuit of the Shalosh HaRagalim, the 3 pilgrim feasts, the 3 Chagim, major festivals that we observe, Pesach, Shavuot, and then Sukkot. Okay, so the Torah doesn't take into consideration like Purim, Tu B'Shvat, Hanukkah. These are obviously what developed later on as their own minor holidays, which are important as well. But in relation to the major holidays, they appear as a circuit, and therefore we keep them at their proper time. We cannot observe them outside. And this is important because if we did not have the mitzvah of Ibor Hashanah, the festivals of both Pesach and Sukkot, they would occur during other seasons of the year and not at their designated times as prescribed by the Torah. The ripening of the grain crops and produce results from the sun's strength, which increases in the spring, and is a function of the solar year. If we did not utilize Ibor Hashanah, where we synchronize the lunar years with the solar years, Pesach will not occur at the time of the ripening of the crops, and likewise Sukkot will not occur at the time of the fall harvest. This is why it's important to note that the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh is dependent upon how Israel comes out of Mitzrayim. There is a direct correlation of time with the spring and fall harvest seasons. This is why I said earlier that depending on how we observe the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh determines how we observe the rest of the mitzvot of the Torah. God's command, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, once again, not just this month shall be for you, but this renewal shall be for you, deals with the value of time. Ibor Hashanah deals with the calculation of time. Kiddush HaChodesh was given to Israel as a gift of time. Prior to the liberation, the Jews were slaves in Mitzrayim, and not slaves in the sense of forced slave labor, like many people perceive the Jews as, but rather they were slaves in the sense of time. It was the late Benjamin Franklin who once said, "Time is money." Very interesting that we honor the memory of Benjamin Franklin by basically putting his face on a $100 bill, and we call them Benjamins, right? But he was the one who said time is money. In other words, Benjamin Franklin understood that as finite beings, time is the most valuable gift that we have. Over in Sefer Kohelet, Shlomo HaMelech, he actually said there something interesting. He said, "Hakasil chovich et yadav," that the fool, he folds his hands, ve'ocha et besaro, and he eats his own flesh. Now, Shlomo HaMelech is not speaking about the exotic diet of cannibalism here, chasas chalila. Rather, he's referring to a person who indulges in their fleshly desire, ve'ocha et besaro. The concept of the fool who folds his hands is describing an individual who is complacent, someone who is lazy, who loves to delve into their carnality. In Parashat Mishpatim, the Torah tells us that if two men get into an altercation that results in violence, chasas chalila, God forbid, if a pregnant woman becomes injured because she gets in the actual middle of the scuffle and she ends up miscarrying the child, the Torah says the penalty for the miscarried child shall be nefesh tachat nefesh, which literally translates as a soul for a soul. Okay? The Torah then goes on to describe other scenarios that instead of a life being lost, it might be somebody lost an eyeball, or they had damage to their eye, they lost a tooth, or they damaged their hand, or damaged their foot. And basically, in the loss of each of these bodily members, the Torah mentions that there is a penalty, okay, that one needs to pay for the bodily damage they afflicted. For instance, here in Exodus 21, verse 24, Ayin tachat ayin, there should be an eye for an eye, shin tachat shin, a tooth for a tooth, yad tachat yad, a hand for a hand, regel tachat regel, there should be a foot for a foot. Now, contrary to how many people try to read this in Western society, the Torah is not actually demanding for a literal life for life, a literal eye for eye, etc. Okay? In fact, the sages tell us that the Torah does not mean that for retribution of a life, an eye, a tooth, etc., that the guilty party must give their eye, their tooth, their hand, or their foot. Rather, phrases such as nefesh tachat nefesh, ayin tachat ayin, etc., it refers to monetary restitution. We see here in the Bavli, Masechet Sanhedrin 79a, Chazal explained over there that when it says nefesh tachat nefesh, a life for a life, it's not referring to execution. Rather, it's referring to monetary restitution. And this understanding is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, as is taught in the Baraita. Once again, the Baraita is an additional piece of Mishnaic literature that was brought down by the court, which means that it's halakhically or legally binding. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says that this phrase, "and you shall give a life, nefesh tachat nefesh, for a life," does not mean execution, but rather monetary restitution for the life that he took. Do you say that it means monetary restitution, or does it mean only the taking of an actual life? Based on the language employed in the verse, it can be determined that the reference is to monetary payment. In these verses, a term of giving is stated below, for instance, in Exodus 21:23, "and you shall give a life for a life." And additionally, a term is stated of giving above. For instance, this is here in Exodus 21:22, "He shall be punished as the husband of the woman shall impose upon him, and he shall give as the judges determine." And it says, just as there in the phrase "give as the judges determine," the reference is to monetary restitution. So too here in the phrase "give a life for a life," the reference is to monetary restitution. Tachat nefesh, tachat nefesh. Now it's interesting on this this passage brought down here in Masechet Sanhedrin, over in Masechet Bava Kama 63b, if I'm not mistaken, which deals with nezekin, which deals with damages based off the narrative of Parashat Mishpatim. The sages explain that in relation to this passage here of Exodus 21:23, in which if, God forbid, a pregnant woman miscarries due to deliberate violence that took place between two men, that if the Sanhedrin determines that the man who instigated the fight, that ended up with a woman miscarrying initially attended premeditatively, determined he wanted to kill the victim he went at, then the Sanhedrin would determine that this individual was originally contemplating murder. And if they could prove it, then there would be a death penalty, a nefesh tachat nefesh. There would be a literal life for a life in this situation that the Sanhedrin then would have to execute this individual because he engaged in an act of violence with the intention of killing somebody. So I thought I would bring that out there for you guys to better understand these pasukim here. Now, in this situation, where retribution for our life, an eye, a tooth, or a hand is monetary in nature, the Torah is teaching us that life is money. Now, to us, money is a commodity, but in truth, money represents time. We can only acquire money by devoting time to its pursuit. What's interesting, in Hebrew, a lot of people are familiar with the term mammon, right? Mammon means money or some sort of, has monetary value to it, whether it's in gold or silver or other tangible assets. Another term for money in Hebrew is a word called damim. It's very interesting. Damim is also plural for bloods, like dam is a singular, but damim means bloods. However, damim can also mean money. So what's the correlation between money and blood, you might be thinking? Well, in order to make money, you have to give up some of your blood, figuratively speaking, your life, your energy. Many of us have used the expression when we're out there working hard. We say, oh man, I'm sweating blood, sweat, and tears, right? I'm giving my all to it. This is why in the Ve'ahavta, we say, Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levacha uv'chol nafshecha uv'chol me'odecha. You shall love Hashem your God with all your heart, with all your soul, u'me'odecha. U'me'odecha, me'od means something that's abundant and great, but the sages say that refers to your wealth, to your finances. Okay, you love Hashem, you serve Him with everything. And so when we work with our energy and we give time, and in return to that, we receive, financial transaction. We get paid money, right? So we can pay our bills and buy our food with. So according to this logic, when the Torah says that when a person causes damages to a pregnant woman, they essentially have caused damage to her process of time. What do I mean? Well, who knows how long it took that woman to become pregnant, right? We know that when a woman does become pregnant, she has 9 months, for the child to develop. But who knows how long before that it took that woman to become pregnant if she was running into any issues with pregnancy. Now that the woman is pregnant, somebody who went out in a blind rage of violence to scuffle and get into an altercation with another man caused this woman to miscarry. And so she may be 7, 8 months into her pregnancy, and chasas chalila if she had miscarried because of somebody's stupidity. So what we learn from this is that it takes time for life to form. And so, mida keneged mida, measure for measure, you must replace the time you stole from that woman with your time, which is your money. Time, according to the Torah, is money. The same principle applies with other articles that are mentioned in Parashat Mishpatim. If you borrow an object and you break it, well, you need to repay the individual monetary restitution. The object you borrow took the owner time to acquire. They used their damim, they used their money, their time and energy to acquire that object. So for full restitution, the Torah says you need to pay with your damim, with your money that you used your life force to acquire. So when Shlomo, going back to Kohelet, refers to the fool that folds his hands and eats his own flesh, ve'ochel es besaro, and he calls this person a kasil, a fool, he's referring to a person who does not value time, a person who's lazy, who's unactive. A person who is self-absorbed in their own desires is a kasil. They're just simply a fool at the end of the day. I'm reminded of a story of the late Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, that at his son's bar mitzvah, he gave his son a watch. And upon giving his son the watch, he told his son, I'm giving you the most precious gift that I can give you. That gift is the gift of time. Make sure you look after time. That's interesting, but if somebody gave you a watch it's not really valuable, maybe a watch from Walmart, you might think, oh, wow, it's a very nice, kind gesture, and they tell you to watch time, what does that mean? Sadly, we live in a generation where time is greatly misappropriated. People do not value time. You can see it in the morning. If you get up to go to work on time, people are usually flying, breaking the speed limit, driving reckless. Why? Because they don't know how to manage their time. They don't know how to get out the house a couple minutes earlier so they can drive the speed limit and have a peaceful trip to work. Instead, you're going to engage people on the roadways, demonstrating their ability to perform sign language and yelling at each other in the mirror of the car. Also, people, same thing, who go to shul, the synagogue, they tend to show up late for prayer. They show up late to half the service. The reason why people do this is because they don't value time. They misappropriate time, okay? And that's something that runs rampant in today's generation. The lack of valuing time actually reminds me of a famous Ashkenaz fable that is known as the wise men of HaShem. And in this story, okay, there is a narrative that the men of HaShem, that they would put on a competition known as the wealthiest man in town. And so every year, the townspeople, they would gather around the lake, and whoever tossed the most coins into the lake was crowned as the wealthiest person in town. And so Moshe the shoemaker, he held the title of the wealthiest man in town for the past 5 years. Every year, somebody would try to beat Moshe, but Moshe would always seem to have one extra gold coin on him. So one year, Yehezqel the blacksmith, he devised a scheme. He figured out how to beat Moshe the shoemaker. As a blacksmith, Yehezqel was able to forge fake gold coins. And so at the annual wealthiest man in town competition, Yehezqel basically had a showdown with Moshe. As Moshe tossed one gold coin into the lake, Yehezqel would throw 2 gold coins into the lake. Well, Moshe would throw 3 gold coins into the lake, well, Yehezqel would throw 4 gold coins into the lake. And at that year's competition, Moshe only had 4 gold coins. Yehezqel ended up beating him by tossing 7 gold coins, mind you, fake gold coins, into the lake. And so after Yehezqel was crowned the wealthiest man in town, a lot of people began to question, how was it possible for a low-income blacksmith to beat a high-income shoemaker? And you got to understand, in those days, for the village of HaShem, a shoemaker yielded more, if you will, profit than a blacksmith, okay? Considering that most people didn't go to war, they didn't need swords or other weapons, so a lot of people needed their shoes repaired, so a shoemaker was in more demand than a blacksmith. Well, after doing some investigation, the people realized that as a blacksmith, Yehezqel forged fake gold coins. So instead of confronting him and snitching on him and exposing him as a cheater, everybody decided to copy his technique. And so at the next year's wealthiest man in town competition, the stakes were raised. Yehezqel thought he could play it safe, and he would only bring about 10 gold coins to the competition. However, Yehezqel was beat by the local hobo 20-10. Not bad, huh? Well, after seeing the hobo won the wealthiest man in town, everyone decided to get on the scheme. They were trying to become the wealthiest man in town. And so this went on for about a couple of years. And during one of the competitions, an actual wealthy man was traveling through the village of HaShem in his horse carriage. And he looked outside the window and he noticed all the people around the lake tossing what appeared to be gold coins into the lake. And when he stopped his carriage, he went to approach some of the people and he says, "What are you doing?" And they told the wealthy man, they said, "We have a competition here every year. Whoever tosses the most gold coins into the lake is crowned the wealthiest man in town." So driven by envy and jealousy, the wealthy man told the town people, he said, "Well, you guys are crazy. I'm the wealthiest man ever." And so the wealthy man, he ordered his servant to bring him a bag full of gold coins. When the wealthy man learned that Beryl the Shlemazel was leading the competition with 125 coins tossed into the lake, the wealthy man came along and he tossed 150 gold coins in the lake. Mind you, this is real gold compared to the fake gold that the townspeople were throwing in. At this time, everyone was shocked. They gasped for air because everyone knew for the past few years, nobody was tossing real gold coins into the lake. It was all fake gold coins. And so the townspeople rushed the wealthy man. They said, "Hey, man, what are you doing? Don't you know that nobody in HaShem is truly wealthy?" They said, "Listen, we were tossing fake gold coins into the lake." Completely distraught and taken back from what he heard, the wealthy man says, "What? What type of fools compete in a competition to be the wealthiest man in town with fake gold coins. It's a very entertaining and funny story, and while many of the stories of the wise men at Chelm serve as a source of entertainment, especially in the Ashkenaz world, they usually contain a deep message to them. What the story is teaching is that when you and I waste a little bit of time here and there, we tend to make it a habit of wasting time in small increments. When we do this, we fail to see that we lose an appreciation of time. This is why once everybody was in on the fake gold coins, gimmick shtick that Yehezqel was doing, the competition lost its full meaning. Now it was all about who could produce the most amount of fake gold coins. And so what happens is we lose an appreciation for time when we are not paying close attention to the minutes we waste. So what we fail to see is that we end up tossing real gold coins into the lake of life without realizing it. We're throwing away the most precious commodity that HaShem has given to us, which is time. Every moment in time represents opportunity. It represents our ability to connect to HaShem. And what we fail to understand is that every moment in time will be relived in its amplified state in Olam Haba. The energy that you put in to your connection to Hashem and your purpose in this world via the Torah mitzvot is the Olam Haba that you create in the next world. This is something that Jewish thought teaches. Spiritually speaking, every moment in time is an opportunity to get gold coins, which is spiritual riches, not to waste gold coins. Imagine, if you will, for a moment. One day, you receive a phone call from a lawyer who's calling you on behalf of a distant cousin you never even knew existed and you never met. And you suddenly discover, via the lawyer, that your distant cousin was a multi-billionaire. And that in his will, he requested to wire transfer every day to your bank account $86,400. Just about $200,000 short of $1 million. However, there was a condition of receiving this $86,400, that according to your distant cousin's will, that in order for you to receive this money daily into your bank account, you had to spend it every day and not leave a penny over in the bank account. So what do you do in a situation? Well, I'm pretty sure I know what you and I would do. We would go on an international shopping spree. We would try to purchase every luxurious item there is underneath the sun. But let's think about this for a second. The notion of receiving a handsome lump sum of $86,400 seems really nice, but to be able to keep receiving that amount of money would require us to look for second after second opportunities to spend that money on. I mean, what can you buy basically and have and then try to rebuy something again that you didn't have? And so while we may be financially secure, our financial security depends on our willingness not to waste time. So we have to figure out how to spend this money and spend it wisely and make sure we don't spend it on something that we already purchased. So it becomes a very taxing thing to do afterwards. What if I told you that each of us receives the equivalent of $86,400 every day? You might say, really? Where at? Well, every day our Father in heaven deposits to us 86,400 seconds. There is 60 seconds to a minute, 3,600 seconds to an hour, and there is 86,400 seconds to a day. And so even though God in his benevolence gives us time to use for his kingdom and for what he brought us into this world for, a lot of us squander it on foolish things. We sit in front of the television, we sit in front of the cell phone, we sit in front of the video game console, we waste time. And as Shlomo HaMelech said, "Hakasir chovech et yadav," the fool folds his hand, ve'ocha et besaro, and he consumes his flesh, meaning his fleshly desires. You and I tend to be engrossed in our own desires. This reminds me of another story, which will take us to the end of this teaching. And really would draw the point out of what I'm trying to teach here today about time is of the essence. One day, there was a man hiking in the mountains. And upon his ascent up this one particular mountain, he discovered what appears to be a box. And as he came to inspect the box, he discovered the box was filled with exotic treasures, had all types of gold, diamonds, and other unique gemstones. So in an attempt to remove the box, the man discovered that the box was wedged in between two set of rocks that was very difficult for him to remove. So realizing that he didn't have enough strength to free the box, the man descended from the mountain to go seek some help. Upon arriving at the entrance of a small village at the base of the mountain, the man saw another man with his hands pressed up against a building as if he was holding it in place. Assuming that the man was stretching, trying to, maybe stretch his muscles out or whatever, he approaches him and he says, "Excuse me, sir, but I need help in retrieving a very special object that is wedged between two rocks on the mountain. If you could come and help me, I'll be more than willing to repay you a handsome salary." The man yelled back. He says, "Listen, I'm sorry, I can't help you right now." The man asks, "Well, why not?" The man then responded, "Don't you see, I'm supporting the walls of this building. And if I take my hands off this building, it's going to collapse and everyone's going to die inside." Scratching his head, he's like, "Okay, let me go find somebody else who's sane." Okay? So as the man travels into the village, he comes to a park. And in the park, he sees a soldier who's armed with his weapons. And he thought to himself, well, if anyone could help me, it would be this soldier. Upon greeting the soldier, the man says, "Excuse me, sir, but I need help in retrieving a very special object that is wedged between a set of rocks on the mountain. If you would be more than willing to come help me, I will be willing to repay you a handsome salary." Well, the soldier responded to the man and says, "Sorry, son, but I'm busy right now. I can't leave my post." "What post?" the man asked. The soldier replied, "Are you blinded, son? Don't you see I'm guarding the sun right now? I need to make sure nobody attempts to launch any projectiles at the sun. I'm a soldier. I'm sworn to preserve the light of the sun against all enemies, foreign and domestic." The man is very confused, thinking that the people are drinking some form of Kool-Aid in the town that is obviously not kosher. So the man basically plays it off, and he continues in town, and he comes to the outskirts of the southern portion of town, of the village, and he sees that there's a man pinned down on the ground, like laying down. And he's very perplexed by the man's behavior. He thought he would ask the man for help. So he goes up to him and says, "Excuse me, sir, but I need help in retrieving a very special object that is wedged between two rocks on a mountain. If you would be willing to come help me, I will be willing to repay you a handsome salary." The man pinned down on the ground responded, "What are you, crazy? Don't you see what I'm doing? I'm pinned to the ground because I am preventing a volcano from erupting. And if I leave, we will all die from a volcanic eruption." Completely disappointed from all the people that he's met in his village, not able to find any help, the man decides to go to the center of the village to find a bar so he could get a beer to drink. I want to blame him. I want to get some vodka, actually. Anyway, as he enters into this bar, it starts to rain outside. And outside the bar, there appeared to be a man who appeared to be normal. And he might be able to actually help free the treasure chest on the mountain. So the man approaches the other gentleman and he says, "Excuse me, sir, but I need help in retrieving a special object that is wedged between a set of rocks on the mountain. If you would be willing to come help me, I am more than willing to repay you a nice, handsome salary." The other man responded and says, "Shh, quiet, I'm counting. 164,000, 165,000, 166,000, 167,000. The man then asks, "Counting what?" The other man says, "What does it look like, idiot? I'm counting the drops of rain. Don't disturb me." And this is how the story ends. In this story, which of the four men would classify as a kasil, as a fool? Would it be the man who was holding up the building, preventing it from falling? Would it be the soldier protecting the sun from projectiles being shot at it? Would it be the man who was pinned to the ground trying to prevent a volcanic eruption? Or would it be the man who was counting raindrops, if such a thing is possible? Well, in context to today's message, the kasil would actually be the man counting the rain. How so? Well, the first three men, even though what they were doing could be deemed as crazy, at least they were engaged in an activity that had some importance. The man counting the rain was engaged in pure futility. And so this story can be compared to many of the idealisms that are done in the world today. Today, we have certain groups of people who are engaged in all sorts of activism. Everything from humanitarian activism, political activism, environmental activism. You can fill in the blanks, okay? There's all types of organizations. And while each of these organizations feel that they serve a purpose, a lot of times their purpose is irrelevant to me. No offense, okay? It's irrelevant. They may have some type of decent cause, but it doesn't revolve around my world per se. Okay, and so to me, each of these organizations can be compared to the man who is holding up the building, or the soldier think he's protecting the sun, or to the man who think he's preventing a volcanic eruption. They're engaged in something, right? But it doesn't make logical sense to me. It's not a part of my day-to-day life, but at least they're doing something, right? And even though these people are engaged in some form of activism, it made me think, what about us? To many of us, we are like the man who is counting raindrops. And so in comparison to the man holding up the building, or the soldier protecting the sun, or the man clinging pinned to the ground, okay, there are organizations in this world that, while they appear to be irrelevant, at least they have something to show for what they're trying to accomplish. But what about us? We are supposed to have something more powerful and life-changing than any activist group in the world. But yet we don't have nothing to show because we're too busy counting raindrops. Counting the rain is a metaphor for all the meaningless things in life that we waste time on. Cell phones, social media, gossip magazines, television, sporting events, socializing, stocks and investments, etc. Our day goes by with nothing to show for it. We start our day with 86,400 seconds, and the majority of the time is wasted on trivial matters. Because many of us have become desensitized to the notion of the value of time, we fail to take an inventory of our life at the end of the day to realize how much gold coins, how much seconds we have wasted, we have tossed into the lake of life on trivial matters. Juxtaposed to the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh is the mitzvah of Pesach. And throughout the remaining verses of the Torah portion, we tend to read the word zachor, remember, in relationship to the mitzvah of Pesach. Why is that? Why does the Torah have to emphasize over and over to remember Pesach? What's the meaning of that? Okay? When the Torah reminds us to remember over and over, it's addressing a flaw in the human condition. The human condition the Torah is addressing is forgetfulness. The reason why the Torah has to remind us over and over, zachar, 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 is that we tend to be influenced by what we do. In other words, we become what we do. What we do impacts who we are, which means what we are impacts what we do. And so by eternalizing the Torah's command of zachar, in a way, we are reprogramming ourselves to be mindful of what matters most. There is a psychological reprogramming that's taking place subconsciously as well as consciously. Considering that the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh is juxtaposed to the mitzvah of Pesach, and the two mitzvot are linked by the Torah's command of Zachar, we are faced with the reality of valuing time. This is why it's important to note that the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh is dependent upon Israel coming out of Mitzrayim. There's a direct correlation of time with the spring, Pesach, and the fall, Sukkot season, which is the harvest time. This is why I mentioned earlier that depending on how we observe Kiddush HaChodesh determines how we observe the rest of the mitzvot. And therefore, if Chazal did not value time in relation to the Moedei HaShem, the appointed times of God, they would have never been meticulous in the mitzvah of Ibur Hashanah, the intercalation of the year in which they created a leap year. Without the mitzvah of Ibur Hashanah, the festivals of Pesach and Sukkot, they would occur during other seasons of the year. Once again, this would happen because the lunar calendar falls 3 years behind the solar calendar, okay? After about a 3-year period, which is about 33 days an entire month. And therefore, the designated times as they are prescribed in the Torah will be outside of their original dates. When the Torah stresses the importance of the Moedei HaShem at Pesach and Sukkot, it's not concerned about a person simply showing up at a Pesach Seder or showing up in the Sukkah at the actual physical designated time. In other words, you could show up at a Seder or you could show up in the Sukkah physically speaking, but spiritually, if you're not in sync with the timing with Hashem, then your whole observance of the mitzvah is off. Pesach and Sukkot are linked to time in relation to the harvest seasons, the spring and the fall. The ripening of grain crops and produce results from the sun's strength, which increases in the spring and is a function of the solar year. Therefore, if you were wasting every day 86,400 seconds of your blood, of your money, of your time and energy on things of this world and not on the kingdom, it does not matter if you show up at a Pesach Seder or sit in the Sukkah during Sukkot, okay? You could physically be there, but spiritually, there's no harvest in your life. And this becomes a problem. A farmer who goes around town boasting to be the greatest farmer in his village can't fool anybody when the harvest season comes and everybody goes to look at the farmer's field and sees, hey, this guy doesn't have anything. There's no harvest here. He's running around claiming he has all this fruit, but there's no fruit. His land is barren. Spiritually speaking, we could run around and profess our love for Hashem and how much we believe in Him, okay? And how much, we fulfill mitzvot, etc. But if we are not investing our 86,400 seconds into what we were brought into this world for, people are going to see that we don't have anything spiritual to offer. There's nothing, because we're misappropriating time on things that are not actually bettering us or bringing us to the forefront of what we were created for. We may be at the right place physically, but spiritually we can also be out of season. And according to the Torah, if Pesach and Sukkot are out of season, no fruit can be produced. This is why it's important to take the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh serious. When the Torah says HaChodesh Chazeh Lachem, once again, it's not just simply saying this month is for you, but that this renewal shall be for you. You have the power to engage in spiritual renewal right now. God gave the command of Kiddush HaChodesh not at Mount Sinai, not in Eretz Israel, but the Torah says Be'eretz Mitzrayim, in the land of Mitzrayim. Remember I explained before, Mitzrayim is for the Lashon and Mitzar, restriction. In the land of restriction where time is not valued. And as I also explained earlier, when the moon completes its revolution, it goes through its cycle. It begins a new cycle that's called a molad, which means birth. And so in between the molad of the moon, there is darkness. In the darkness of life, you need to utilize your time to give birth to a harvest. You always have to enter into a renewal, a regeneration, a rebirth every month. So last month, you may not produce something. This month you can. Every month the Torah commands us to be renewed, to bring life. And we have to do this in sync with Hashem's Torah in the proper time to fulfill our purpose in this world. And so with that said, Chavarim, I hope that this teaching has been illuminating and also invigorating and inspiring and challenging at the same time to help you engage in the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. And once again, if our organization is a blessing to you, prayerfully consider to continue supporting us. You can find the links on our website. You can donate there. There's also an address if you want to send a check or money order in, or you can donate via PayPal. We greatly appreciate your support and also your prayers. And if you have any questions regarding some of the topics from the Torah portion, you can always send me an email, rabbi@70facesoftorah.com. I will get to those in the order that they come in. Until next time, Chavarim, may the God of Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov bless you and your families. Shalom and Kol Tov.